Welcome to the Indomitable podcast. I'm your host, Ciruolo, and today we have another great episode that will leave you inspired. Today, we're talking about the state of the foster care system in the U.S. because May is National Foster Care Awareness Month. If you're a regular here, you know I spent almost my entire childhood as a foster kid. So for today's episode, I'm going to walk you through some of the facts that the average person is unaware of regarding foster care in hopes that every time I speak about the system, more and more folks get involved to help us move the needle on this important and often ignored issue. One of the biggest issues in the national foster care system is the fact that Black children are overrepresented in foster care. In 2022, there were over 390,000 total youth in foster care across the United States. Of those youth, 22% were Black, 22% were Hispanic, and 43% were white. During that same time period, Black children made up only 14% of the U.S. population. Hispanic children only made up 26% of the U.S. population, and white children made up 49% of the U.S. population. So Black children have a higher representation in foster care than they do in the country as a whole, which isn't true for their peers in other groups. Black children are 2 times as likely to be put into foster care. Not only that, that fact is from the Adoption and Foster Care Analysis Reporting System. So I would like to start off with that fact because I want folks to be aware of the barrier to exit when we are talking about the foster care system, especially when we're talking about Black families. So one of the things not a lot of people know is the fact that once you have an open case with social services, they require certain things for you to be able to get your kids back. And one of the things that they require is that you have to have stable and long-term living arrangements. So that needs to look like a lease. That needs to look like if you have 2 children of separate genders, you need to have a house or an apartment that is 2 to 3 bedrooms at least. And in most areas of the country, we are looking at a housing crisis. So when we require that, we are putting up a barrier that not a lot of people can meet. That isn't the reality. So one of the things that we need to be able to do as adults supporting our communities is make sure that these folks have access to stable and long-term housing when they have children. That isn't going to be about them jumping through hoops because, again, we're living in a housing crisis in most areas of the United States. So that's one of the things that we need to do. Another thing that's really important is when we are looking at, this requirement, oftentimes if somebody's trying to live with a family member, they don't have access to a traditional lease in that same way either. Another important fact about the foster care system is that, in fact, Black families and Black adults are more interested in adopting children out of foster care than their peers in other groups, and that's just a fact. So one of the things that they actually get involved in is called kinship care. Kinship care is when you have an aunt, a grandmother, an uncle who is raising a child in their family who maybe has a parent who is absent or unavailable to raise that child. So that is called kinship care. And that's one of the things that I also think that the foster care system needs to put a greater emphasis on nationwide. Another sad fact about foster care is that youths in foster care are often targets for traffickers. So foster care youth, particularly girls, are targeted by sex traffickers. And the criminalization of sex work can funnel these victims right into modern day slavery situations because of the criminal justice system. One of the more terrifying facts about foster care is that a lot of children are living, especially teenagers, are living in group homes. And we will see outside of group homes, first of all, those are underfunded, often privatized. Often the folks living around those group homes are outraged that they're there. I can think of a number of those examples. So they're underfunded, they're understaffed, all of those things. They're dealing with behavioral issues and mental health concerns. And in those circumstances, which is just a powder keg, we will see traffickers park outside of the group homes. They, of course, know where they are between the hours of 2 and 6, because not only is that when children are getting home from school, that is when the customers are getting out of work. So we're seeing traffickers park outside of group homes to scoop up children to come perform sex work services. And then those children are often being funneled into the criminal justice system through this route, which of course is incredibly dangerous and awful. So one of the things that we need to look at as a community when we're thinking about foster care is how easy it is to victimize people that nobody's watching already. The next fact I would like to talk to you about is that there are fewer than 200,000 licensed foster homes in the United States. So remember that fact I just gave you a few minutes ago, where we know that there are at least 390,000 kids languishing in foster care? There are less than 200,000 licensed foster homes for those kids. So what does that mean? It means that there aren't places for those kids to go that are safe. And most importantly, there isn't oversight for a lot of the places that we have to put those kids. And the burden to keep those kids safe is falling on already overburdened social workers who are only supposed to have a certain amount of cases for safety and are in fact taking on more and more cases for less and less money, working longer and longer hours, burning out faster. And we are seeing that within the system as we continue to try to defund the foster care system. So here's another fun fact. States hire for-profit companies to recoup foster care costs. So when the state puts out money for foster care, it tries to now get those monies back. States hire for-profit consulting companies which investigate each child's Social Security benefits and will apply to become the beneficiary of those funds on behalf of the child, often without telling the child, the child's parents, the child's family, or any of that. So these companies will search private medical records, social worker notes, school records, looking for things like PTSD and other mental health concerns that would increase the payouts from Social Security benefits. So it's not paying the companies themselves. The state pays the companies themselves, but those monies go to the state to recoup child foster care costs. States are currently under no obligation to inform these children or their families that they have taken benefits to recoup foster care costs. One of the examples that NPR used in collaboration with the Marshall Project when they first launched this investigation, one of the examples that they used was the example of a kid who had been put in foster care after his father was killed overseas fighting for his country. The state, which was Alaska, the state then went and applied for all of his Social Security benefits in the thousands of dollars to recoup the money that they'd put out for foster care for him. And by the way, when we're talking about that, we aren't talking about putting these kids in fancier homes. That doesn't exist. Once you go into foster care, as you know, as an adult, as a thinking adult in the US or wherever you are, I'm sure that once a child is put into contact with the foster care system, we can pretty much guarantee that their opportunities are going to go down for sure. Their outcomes are going to become more and more sad, more and more dire, more and more tragic. Another thing I'd like to talk to you about is the foster care to prison pipeline. So by the age of 17, over 50% of foster care children will have an encounter with the juvenile legal system through arrest, conviction, or detention. That problem is so bad that a quarter of foster care alumni will become involved with the justice system within 2 years of aging out. So let's talk about that a little bit. We know that there is a school to prison pipeline largely through the fact that we are underfunding schools, underfunding mental health programs, underfunding all of those things that would be impacting kids, especially foster kids. And then what we are doing instead of that is we are putting in that place SROs, so school resource officers, who are coming in and acting as sort of an end-all be-all disciplinarian, oftentimes introducing children to the juvenile justice system who maybe just needed a place to take a break. So when we are underfunding our schools in that way, when we are underfunding our mental health resources as a state in that way, we are doing grievous injury to the people that are the most vulnerable already. Now, What do I mean by kids will become involved in the juvenile justice system within 2 years of aging out? I mean that across the nation, on average, the age out age is 18 years old. What does aging out mean? It means that once you hit the age of maturity, 18 apparently, most states are no longer required to continue offering foster care services. In the state that I live in Massachusetts, once a child turns 18, they are allowed to stay within a foster home that they are in as long as the foster home agrees till the age of, I believe it's 21. So that is a slightly better outcome. But again, nowhere near where we need to be. We are not offering children these transitional places to live. We are not offering them what they need in terms of funding their own education. We are not offering them networks of people who can help them get access to gainful employment. None of those things are happening. All of the things that the average child would need, the average 18-year-old would need, that does not exist for children who have no network, no support system in place. We are just sort of leaving them out in the cold. So of course, they often become re-involved with the system through the justice system within 2 years of aging out of foster care. According to the Hopewell Institute of Massachusetts, by the age of 26, only 3 to 4% of youth who aged out of the foster care system will earn a college degree. That's me. I'm one of that 3%. Of 1 in 5 of these youth will become homeless after turning 18. Only half will obtain employment by the age of 24. Over 70% of girls in foster care will become pregnant by the age of 21, and 1 in 4 former foster care youth will experience PTSD. I'm shocked that that number is so low. It feels like that should be significantly higher, but then I suppose reporting would be the issue. So what can we do? What can we as adults in our communities do? We need to encourage survivors to share their stories. We need to listen to them. I know from my own experience that whenever I need to talk about my story, whenever I need to share my story as part of my everyday, living, I will often get pushback from folks that, they can't hear that, or they can't, it's too triggering for them. And I understand the idea that something can be too triggering for people who are dealing with trauma, but people who just want to live a very casual life, living on the surface in their boat, bobbing along, I think they are missing the point of what it means to be human, of what it means to be alive, right? So we need to encourage survivors to share their stories, and we need to listen to them and make them feel heard and supported. We need to pursue proper funding and proper standards of care, proper licensing within all foster homes and adoptive homes. We need to make sure that social workers are well trained, well supported, and only handling a safe number of cases at one time. We need to vote for safeguards to protect foster survivors from private interests at the federal level. And we need to fund our schools. Teachers are our first responders for family and social issues. We know this. We know that most kids are seen by their teacher first as struggling, as having problems, as being malnourished, any of the things that I ran into. We know that teachers are our first responders when it comes to children. So we need to fund our schools, fund training, fund and train and support our teachers. That's really one of the most important things that we can do to protect foster kids, is make sure that they have a safe place to go to school, where they are being offered those opportunities, where they have access to that education. There really isn't a more important thing than funding our schools when it comes to children. From my experience, by the time I was probably around 7 or 8 years old, I was living in one of the nicer areas of town. I had access to resources that I would not have been able to dream about in the situation I was born into. However, it was very obvious to me that I was unwelcome there. It was regularly whispered about that I didn't belong with their kids. And I think that sort of lives on today. I'm a part of my school system's PTO, and for our school, one of the things that we do is that anytime we do an event, our PTO will make sure that that event is funded in such a way that every kid that wants to participate can participate. Any extra cost will be absorbed by us. That is not the case in some of these nicer areas of town because they don't have to think about that. So when we were talking to local PTOs, they were saying that if there were students who couldn't afford to participate, that they would just stay in their classes and just sit there, apparently not participating. And the PTO doesn't do the same thing, even though they could afford to do more than perhaps we can do. So what I would argue to you is, if you are living in a nicer area, if you have access to more resources, if your kids have access to more resources, build a longer table, not a higher wall, right? It is so important that we as adults in this day and age, I mean, a lot of us are millennials, Gen X, I know that you're out there too, fighting the good fight. But those of us who are adults are responsible for the children in our own communities. If parents that have given birth to those kids for whatever reason aren't able to support them in the same way, aren't getting by, we can't just say that some kids are worth less than our own children are worth to us, even on their worst day. There are kids who are living day to day, as we know in the US, without access to food, without access to regular shelter, that are living on people's couches, that don't have access to medical care. Today, in 2024, we have those problems. Kids going to bed hungry in the United States is absolutely unfathomable to me. You cannot be the greatest country in the world if you have starving children going to bed hungry every night. That's insane. So I would argue that you, me, all of us within a community are responsible for the children within our community. And we have to act as if they were our own children. I spend a lot of time in our local schools making sure that any extra energy, any extra resources that I have are being pumped into my local community. And I would encourage you to do the same. If you are able to, as I said, make sure that you are making room for other kids at the table. What does it cost you? Who does it hurt? No one. In fact, it's the best thing that we can do. The best thing that we can do is be responsible for each other. The best thing that we can do in this day and age in 2024, post-pandemic, post all of these terrible things happening, look at the life I've lived. Look at the place I've been. Look at how I had to come up. Look what I had to struggle with. Look what I had to survive. And yet I'm still looking you in your face and telling you it is so, so important that you rise to that level of community awareness and community support, because continuing to bury our heads in the sand have gotten us exactly where we are today. And there has not been enough progress since I grew up in foster care to today, because people don't care. And they should care. They should care about their kids in their community. Whether or not they birthed them or not is kind of irrelevant. They live next door to you. They're at your local schools. I hope that we as a community can rise to the challenge to change the way the foster care system is behaving in the US, to change the outcomes for these children, hopefully once and for all. That'll be the work of my lifetime. And I hope you'll join me in this work, because as I said, it is so, so important. All right. Y'all, thank you for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to the Indomitable podcast for more incredible stories of humaning. Remember, my new book, Indomitable, A Foster Care Story, right here, is available wherever you get your books. So if you are interested in hearing more of my story, maybe you haven't heard it yet, Indomitable, A Foster Care Story is available everywhere. Thank you to all of my Indomitable friends who came to visit me at the local author event at BPL last weekend. This summer, I'll be dropping a new episode every other week to accommodate a busy travel schedule. I am doing a lot of speaking events. I'm very excited. So I will be doing every other week, but I am even more excited to bring you all of these fantastic stories, and I can't wait to share them with you. So if you have any upcoming events you'd like me to bring the Indomitable experience to, please submit a request via my website at ciruolo.com. And finally, I am so happy to have you here in community with me. And remember, together we are truly indomitable. Take care, everyone.